there's a new report that says that CSAM, a child sexual abuse material, also known as child pornography, is continuing to grow rampantly on X. So talk about that issue for people who might not even be aware that that is such a huge problem right now.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it really is a significant problem. It's a problem on really all online platforms, but on X, formerly Twitter, it seems worse, at least worse potentially than ever before on X. So there is this trend where there are many hashtags on Twitter, on X, that are associated with the sharing of child sexual abuse material or child pornography. And this has been a long-standing problem. I myself have seen it. And unfortunately, it seems to be getting worse. That's what this NBC News report says, that there are certain hashtags that they've been tracking where now it seems like there are more and more posts on these hashtags, sometimes even posting several times a minute of sharing child sexual abuse material. And what's really concerning about this is obviously we know that the sharing of CSAM happens on the dark web, but it's happening in open spaces publicly. The hashtags are very public. And very often I myself have even seen individuals trying to tag Twitter support or X support, asking for them to address the fact that these are very public, shareable ways of sharing this illegal content and this abuse content. So it's very concerning that the problem seems to be getting worse and not better.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like X is just on the cusp of really becoming nothing more than a pornography platform. I mean, because I'm thinking about this law in Texas that was just upheld by the Supreme Court that says you have to have age verification systems put in place to access a pornography website in certain states, Texas, of course, being one of them. Virginia has similar laws, as well as Utah and a handful of others. I mean, are we to a place now where a site like X ought to have an age verification requirement to go on, because predators are getting, as you said, especially with hashtags, are getting better and better at sharing this content online?
Yeah, it is a problem, and especially because X intentionally allows the sharing of pornographic content, then they become a hub for it because people can post there, and X is not doing anything to verify the age, consent, or identity of the people in pornographic videos on their platform. So it's a huge problem because it's not only children, child sexual abuse material, but also revenge pornography, AI deep fakes, so many different kinds of what we call adult image-based sexual abuse or non-consensual sharing of images is happening on this platform. So yeah, I think at this point, if X wants to act like it's a pornography website and allow this kind of thing, then they should be regulated that same way. Mm-hmm.
Well, unfortunately, when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, he said that eliminating CSAM was a top priority. And then last year, even it was in the spring, he said that X cares and does more about child safety than any other social media platform on the internet. What do you make of those claims when we're here talking about this issue in June of July almost of 2025?
Mm-hmm. A lot of these social media companies will say the right thing, and even their policies on paper will look strong on the front end. They'll say we have no tolerance for this abusive behavior, but then they do tolerate it in practice. So that's just what we're seeing is they can say the right things, but their actions aren't backing it up. I mean, some of these hashtags that were discussed in the NBC interview have been identified as being associated with CSAM since 2023. And they are still not only active, but still being actively used for the spreading of child sexual abuse material to this day. I would also argue that it doesn't seem like child safety is really X's top priority because they have started rolling out encrypted direct messaging on their platform, which is very similar to WhatsApp, which of course has become a haven of CSAM and sextortion and other kinds of, sex trafficking, networking, and grooming as well. And we see that that's very typical for encrypted direct messaging systems. And X is kind of opening up a whole new door for ways that predators can interact on their platform and not even fixing the existing problems that are already happening.
So there are some platforms and potentially X that are using AI to monitor for illicit materials, things like CSAM. But how good can those systems actually be if there's no human being at the end of that system kind of overseeing it and checking the work of artificial intelligence?
There does need to be, you do need a human element, I think, in safety features and moderation for abuse on different platforms. I would say, though, I think the technology is really improving if they're willing to employ it. The problem is that I think many of these sites are not employing robust AI technology to actually identify and remove novel material. A lot of these sites will employ hashing systems, which removes or identifies previously reported and documented videos of child sexual abuse. But that is an incredibly, almost infinitesimally small amount of what's out there. Most of what's out there is novel. It's a child who's being abused today, and that video is being shared online. And so their systems are missing it. But there is technology that can identify it with greater than 90% accuracy. It just doesn't seem like they're using it or prioritizing it.
Yeah. And you mentioned this a couple minutes ago, but what's also terrifying is the fact that AI can actually be used to create pornography. So it can certainly be used to help eliminate it, but it's also being used, like I said, to create it out of thin air, right? It's pornography that otherwise would not exist. So what's the legal recourse for people who are victimized by that? And how can the Take It Down Act sort of help victims? Because I know that is also something rampant on X.
Yes, this is a rampant problem, and it takes just one photo of a person and less time than it takes to brew a cup of coffee to create a realistic, sexually explicit deepfake video of someone. So this is a problem that impacts all of us. The good news in this area is that there was bipartisan legislation passed called the Take It Down Act, which does two important things. One is that it does make it federally criminalized for a person to intentionally share non-consensually created or non-consensual material, sexually explicit material online. So that's good because a lot of states had passed that kind of criminalization, but some states hadn't. So it needs to be a protection that everyone has, that individual who shares a video could be held accountable. But what's most important about this act is that it now holds online platforms accountable, where if a survivor reports that a video or image of them is a non-consensual explicit image, that platform now has 48 hours to remove it, to take that image down. And they must do that. It is now a requirement. And it is also a requirement that it be easily accessible to find how to report that kind of content. So we're encouraged by this because unfortunately, that 48-hour window is way better than what it used to be. We had worked with survivors whose sexual abuse was filmed and uploaded, and it took weeks, if not months, to get the content removed from this social media platform or that one. So we are hopeful that this will put more power back into the hands of survivors, and hopefully it will help these online platforms start taking these issues more seriously.
Well, and I know too, a huge part of the problem is, let's say somebody is coerced into an act, or there's revenge porn that's uploaded onto a site like Pornhub, and then it's downloaded 10,000 times and re-uploaded to Reddit, and then it ends up on X. So how does this law specifically, I know you mentioned that they have 48 hours for Reddit or X or whatever to take that down. Do you foresee that being successful, or do you think that it's still going to be a slow churn before a victim can stop being repeatedly victimized?
It's a really important question. I think this bill is a really important step in the right direction, but there is still more that needs to be done. Like I had mentioned that there's a hashing system for known child sexual abuse material. Really, I think we should have something similar for reported or known adult image-based sexual abuse or non-consensually shared material that can help prevent it from being uploaded across all social media platforms. So I think that there's more to be done in that space. And in general, I think there's more to be done for these online platforms to have the incentive to take these issues very seriously, because right now, unfortunately, there's a law called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And that's been interpreted by many courts to give big tech pretty much broad immunity from anything that happens on their platform, even reckless or knowing facilitation of sexual abuse and exploitation. And that kind of perceived immunity that they're going to get means that safety teams are kind of at the bottom of the barrel in decision making at a lot of these companies. So we do think that the Take It Down Act is a really important step forward because it puts a chink in that armor of saying platforms do have some responsibility here to remove abusive content, but there's certainly more that needs to be done.
Yeah. Now, Haley, you work for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. So before I let you go, I want to ask you, as somebody who works in this field and is kind of taking in all of this information and sharing it and raising awareness about it, what practical steps can our listeners take to protect themselves and, if they have kids, their families from potential exposure or even, God forbid, attacks against them on social media platforms like X?
Oh, so important. And unfortunately, parents especially face a really difficult job. So it's just important to acknowledge because every app has different weaknesses and their settings change, and it's very difficult for parents to keep on top of. If I could say one thing, I would say have conversations with your children about these issues as frequently as possible. You know, it used to be the case that you would have one sex talk between a parent and their child about the mechanics of how it works. But this needs to be an ongoing conversation because not only is culture talking to kids about this regularly, but the technology is changing. What your child might be experiencing online changes regularly. So I would try to even use this interview as an excuse to talk to your child about it in an age-appropriate way. You can say, I was listening to the news, I was reading an article, and I was hearing about this issue. Have you ever seen something like that online? You can also share yourself personally. You know, I've been exposed to things that I didn't want to see before online, and it made me feel this way. Have you ever had that? Trying to take away shame for a child or take away fear that if they admit that maybe they messaged someone that they don't know online before, or maybe they've seen something not age appropriate online, that they'll not ever be allowed to use the internet again, maybe take some of that fear away for them. But just having conversations around it is a really important place to start. And then I would say trying to delay social media use as much as possible. You know, every parent and family has their own different boundaries on that, but generally delaying is helpful.
Yeah. You know, I think unfortunately we live in a world now where it's not if, it's when you're going to be exposed to sexually explicit material or pornography. So it's critical, I think, to have an open door policy to these conversations, right? Make your kids feel at home and comfortable talking about these things, because if they're not talking to you about it, they're talking to somebody else, right? These conversations are going to happen. So, I think you're 100% spot on about just making kids comfortable to talk about these issues with their parents. Haley, thank you so much for being here to break this down.
Thank you so much.